One, it was a late October evening, and I was walking back to my car after a long day helping out at a local farm. I'd been volunteering there for a few weekends, mostly doing simple tasks like setting up for the corn maze, arranging pumpkins, things like that. It was a small, family-owned place, and they were always short on help, especially as Halloween approached. The farm was nestled on the edge of town, surrounded by endless acres of tall corn. When the sun set, the stalks seemed to close in, the narrow paths winding in ways that could confuse even the most experienced wanderer. That evening, as I finished up my work and started to head toward the parking lot, I realized I'd left my phone back at the main tent. I cursed under my breath, knowing I'd have to trek back through the cornfield path to get it. Normally, I'd just wait until morning, but my phone had my wallet case with all my cards and ID. I needed it for the drive home. I sighed, pulled out my flashlight, and retraced my steps through the maze. The tall cornstalks surrounded me, rustling in the cold autumn wind. I'd been through that maze so many times that I practically knew it by heart, but that night, everything felt different. The usual path felt wrong, somehow, as if it twisted in ways I didn't remember. Then, about halfway through, I felt it. I stopped in my tracks. That feeling, the eerie one you get when you're sure someone's watching you, clung to me like cold sweat. I spun my flashlight around, but there was nothing, just row upon row of swaying cornstalks. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just the wind, and kept going. But then I heard it. A soft, crunching sound, like footsteps, just a few rows over. My heart raced as I turned my flashlight in the direction of the sound. Nothing. No one was there. I swallowed hard but kept moving, my pace quickening. I didn't want to look like I was scared, even though I was the only one around. The crunching of leaves followed me, staying just a few steps behind, then stopping whenever I did. It was like a game, and I was the one being hunted. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I saw the dim glow of the tent lights up ahead. Relief washed over me as I broke into a jog, eager to get to my phone and out of that maze. But as I neared the end of the path, I saw a figure standing just beyond the light, partially hidden in the shadows. My footsteps slowed. I couldn't make out who or what it was. The person, or whatever it was, just stood there, facing me. They were tall and thin, almost blending in with the cornstalks. For a second, I thought maybe it was one of the scarecrows. But then I saw it shift, leaning just slightly forward. My heart sank as the figure began moving closer, their steps slow and deliberate. I backed up instinctively, barely able to breathe as they kept their pace, matching my every retreat. "Hey," I called out, hoping my voice didn't sound as shaky as I felt. "Is someone out there?" Silence. The figure stopped, still just out of the reach of my flashlight. I could see now that they were wearing some kind of jacket, torn and hanging loosely from their shoulders. Their face was obscured by the shadow of their hood. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet were frozen in place. I forced myself to take a step back, then another. Just as I turned, I heard their voice, a low, raspy whisper that barely broke the silence. "Leaving so soon?" My blood turned to ice. I didn't wait to hear anything more. I bolted, running as fast as I could through the twisting rows of corn, stumbling over roots and kicking up dirt as I went. The flashlight bounced wildly in my hand, barely illuminating the path, but I didn't dare slow down to steady it. Behind me, I heard the sound of footsteps crashing through the corn, gaining on me. Panic surged through me as I pushed myself harder, the cold air cutting into my lungs. But no matter how fast I ran, the footsteps stayed close, just out of sight, but never far enough away. I don't know how, but I finally made it out of the maze and reached the main tent. I stumbled inside, gasping for air, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold onto the counter as I grabbed my phone. As the sun rose, I packed my things and left. I didn't even say goodbye to Kyle. 12. To this day, I don't know who or what was out there in the corn. Part of me wonders if it was just my imagination, the isolation and darkness playing tricks on me. But every now and then, late at night, I'll hear that same tapping sound outside my window, and I'll remember the voice calling to me from the fields. I haven't been back to the farm since, and I don't think I ever will. Used to move. The minutes dragged on as I sat there, my pulse pounding in my ears. The wife stayed by my side, looking just as tense. Finally, the husband returned, shaking his head. "No one out there," he said. I walked the entire path. I was baffled. I'd heard the footsteps, seen the figure, but there was no one there. I wanted to argue, to insist that what I'd experienced was real, but the look on his face told me he'd never believe me. Reluctantly, I thanked them and headed back to my car. I drove home in silence, replaying the night's events over and over in my mind. I barely slept, every sound outside my window sending me into a fresh wave of paranoia. The next morning, I decided to put it all behind me. Maybe it was a prank, maybe my mind had just been playing tricks. But when I got to the farm that day, the owners pulled me aside, looking worried. "We found something in the maze," the husband said, his tone grim. He held out a small, torn piece of fabric. It was dark and dirty, but I recognized it immediately. It was part of the jacket I'd seen on the figure. That was the last day I ever set foot on that farm. I couldn't shake the image of that figure, standing just out of reach, watching me. I told myself I was done with the cornfields, that it was all in my head. But sometimes on quiet nights, I still hear those footsteps in my mind, echoing through the endless rows of corn. And somewhere, deep down, I know he's still out there, waiting.
Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more terrifying horror stories.
I don't know why I agreed to go back to the farm that weekend, especially after last year. I was raised in a small town, and the sprawling fields were as normal to me as streetlights are to someone from the city. But this time, everything felt wrong from the start. I could feel it as soon as I arrived. My friend Kyle had called me up to help him with his dad's corn harvest. His dad was getting on in years and needed an extra set of hands. Kyle and I had grown up together, and his family's farm was practically my second home. But that was before I moved away. Before I started to notice the eerie isolation of the place, the unsettling silence of the fields at night. The first day was fine, though long. It was dusk when we finally finished, and after a quick meal, we headed to the guest room his parents had set up for me. The window overlooked the fields, and as I looked out, I could see the vast sea of corn stretching out endlessly. The wind stirred the stalks, creating a soft rustling sound. It was strangely comforting, a reminder of home. But the comfort didn't last. As I lay in bed, drifting off, I thought I heard footsteps outside my window. They were faint, barely audible over the wind. I told myself it was just an animal, a deer maybe, wandering through the corn. But then I heard it again. Deliberate, slow footsteps, like someone creeping around the perimeter of the house. I sat up, straining to listen, but all I heard was silence. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing and forced myself to sleep, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me. The next morning, Kyle mentioned he'd seen tracks near the edge of the field, large, human-sized tracks that cut through the corn. "Probably some hunter," he said casually, though hunting season wasn't for another month. We didn't talk about it again, but a creeping dread started to settle in the back of my mind. That afternoon, we were deep in the fields, tending to some of the overgrown patches, when I got that feeling again, the feeling of being watched. The corn was tall and thick, creating narrow paths between the rows, but occasionally, I'd catch glimpses of something moving just out of sight. I'd glance over, only to see empty stalks swaying in the breeze. Kyle noticed me looking and laughed. "The corn's messing with your head, isn't it?" he said. He told me stories about how people sometimes thought they saw things in the fields, especially when they were out there alone. "You start hearing whispers, seeing shadows. It's all in your head," he assured me, though he didn't look quite convinced himself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the tracks, about the shadows I thought I'd seen. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again, slow, methodical, like someone pacing just outside the window. My heart was racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. I reminded myself of what Kyle had said. It was just the corn, playing tricks on me. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A low, rhythmic tapping, like someone running their fingers along the side of the house. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't take it anymore. I got out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and crept to the window. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the rows of corn. For a moment, everything was still. Then just at the edge of the light, I saw it. A figure, partially obscured by the stalks. It was tall and thin, standing perfectly still, watching me. I froze, gripping the flashlight so hard my knuckles turned white. I blinked and the figure was gone, swallowed by the darkness and the corn. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, I tried to tell Kyle what I'd seen, but he just laughed it off. "You're letting the isolation get to you," he said, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Trust me, there's no one out there." But I knew what I'd seen. I knew there was something or someone in those fields. We spent the afternoon fixing an irrigation line that ran through the center of the cornfield. The sun was low in the sky by the time we finished, casting long shadows over the field. I kept glancing around, half expecting to see that figure again, but there was nothing. As we were packing up, I heard it, a soft, raspy whisper, like someone breathing just behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. Kyle looked at me, eyebrows raised. "You okay, man?" I didn't want to sound crazy, so I just nodded and muttered something about being tired. But as we headed back to the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and rustle. The footsteps started again, closer this time, followed by that same rhythmic tapping. I clenched my fists, heart pounding. I didn't dare look out the window. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. I lay there, straining to hear, but all I got was silence. I told myself it was over, that I was safe. But just as I started to relax, I heard a soft voice, barely more than a whisper, coming from right outside the window. "Come out." I froze, every muscle tensed. The voice was low and raspy, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. "Come out." I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I lay there, paralyzed, listening to that voice calling to me from the darkness. I don't know how long it lasted, but eventually, the voice faded and silence settled over the field. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and as soon as the sun rose, I packed my things and left. I didn't even say goodbye to Kyle. To this day, I don't know who or what was out there in the corn. Part of me wonders if it was just my imagination, the isolation and darkness playing tricks on me. But every now and then, late at night, I'll hear that same tapping sound outside my window, and I'll remember the voice calling to me from the fields. I haven't been back to the farm since, and I don't think I ever will.
I never thought of farms as scary places. I grew up on one, so the creaking of barn doors, the rustling of the wind through cornfields, the chorus of crickets at dusk, these sounds were like a lullaby to me. Peaceful. But after that autumn, I started hearing those sounds a little differently. It was a couple of years back. My parents had gone to visit my aunt in another town, and I was left in charge for the weekend. Just me, 23 years old and a bit cocky about running the place on my own. I didn't mind. I actually looked forward to the quiet. The first night was fine. I did the usual chores, locked up the animals, and headed to bed early. But as I was drifting off, I heard something strange, a faint scratching noise. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks, or maybe a raccoon pawing at the side of the barn. I decided to ignore it and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I walked out to the barn and saw it. Deep scratches on the wooden door, long and jagged, as if something with claws had tried to get in. It wasn't the usual wear and tear. I knelt down to get a closer look. The grooves were fresh, the wood splintered. I thought of the raccoons again, or maybe a stray dog. Whatever it was desperate. I shook it off, went about my day, but there was a chill in the air that I couldn't quite shake. And it wasn't just the weather. By late afternoon, the fog started rolling in, thick and low, swallowing up the fields and wrapping around the trees like some kind of living thing. I'd seen fog before, sure, but this was different. It felt heavy, and it settled quickly, like a curtain falling over the land. Around dusk, I headed back out to the barn to lock up for the night. The fog was so thick by then that I could barely see a few feet ahead of me. The barn loomed up out of the gray like some massive, shadowy beast. I opened the door, and the animals were restless, more than usual. The cows stamped their feet, and the chickens clucked and fluttered. Even the old barn cat, Shadow, was pacing around nervously, her tail twitching. I tried to calm them down, but that's when I heard it again, the scratching. This time, it was louder, slow, deliberate. Not at the barn door, but from inside the walls. My heart started to pound. I moved closer, straining to hear. There it was again, a slow scrape, almost like a dragging sound, moving along the inside of the barn wall. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Rats, I told myself. It's just rats in the walls. The fog was even thicker now, swirling around my feet as I walked. The knocking sound grew louder as I moved toward the fields. My breath fogged in front of me, and I could barely see my own hand in front of my face. I grabbed a flashlight and aimed it at the spot where the sound seemed to be coming from, but the beam of light cut through nothing but dusty air. The scratching stopped. I stood there for what felt like forever, just listening, my breath caught in my throat. And then it came again, this time louder, more frantic, like whatever was making it was angry now. My pulse quickened. I turned and hurried out of the barn, bolting the door behind me. That night I barely slept. I lay awake in bed, listening, waiting for the sound to return, but the house was eerily silent. Just as I began to relax, thinking maybe it really was just a stray animal or a trick of my imagination, I heard a faint, distant noise. A low, almost rhythmic thumping sound, like something knocking softly on wood. Not at the house, but out in the fields. I told myself it was just the wind or maybe a branch hitting against something. But as I lay there, straining to hear, I realized it wasn't random. It was steady, a pattern. I couldn't just lie there, so I grabbed the flashlight and went outside, the cold night air prickling my skin. Then I saw it, just a dark shape at first, barely visible through the fog. A figure. It was hunched over, moving slowly through the rows of corn. My heart leapt into my throat. It was too dark to make out any details, but it was tall, much taller than any person should be, and thin, almost impossibly thin. I froze, gripping the flashlight so hard my knuckles turned white. "Hey!" I called out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The figure stopped, turning its head slowly toward me. I couldn't see its face, just a dark silhouette against the gray fog. Then it started moving again, faster this time, its movements jerky, unnatural. I felt a surge of panic. This isn't real, I told myself. It's just a trick of the light. But as the figure drew closer, I heard that sound again, that steady, rhythmic knocking. I realized it wasn't a knock at all. It was the sound of its feet hitting the ground, one slow, deliberate step at a time. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I turned and ran, sprinting back toward the house, the fog wrapping around me like a shroud. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, my heart hammering in my chest. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the window, expecting to see that dark shape lurking outside, but there was nothing, just fog. I spent the rest of the night sitting by the window, watching, waiting. The knocking sound eventually faded, replaced by the familiar creaks and groans of the old house settling. I tried to convince myself that it was over, that whatever I'd seen was gone. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The next morning, the fog was still thick, but I forced myself to go out and check the fields. There were tracks in the dirt, long, deep tracks, like something heavy had been dragged. They led from the barn, out into the fields, and then just stopped. Like whatever made them had vanished into thin air. I never saw the figure again, but I still hear the knocking sometimes, late at night when the fog rolls in thick. A steady, rhythmic sound, like something out there is still searching, still waiting. And now, whenever I hear the wind rustling through the cornfields, it doesn't sound like a lullaby anymore. It sounds like a warning.